How you doing?
Hey, Kirsten. Hey, Eddie. Hello, audience. So I've been thinking about it. E-commerce had such a boom during the pandemic. Eddie, how fast did you have to scale your business?
Well, at first we had to slow it down real quick when the pandemic first hit, because we weren't sure if we were going to survive or not. The pandemic was crazy. At first, it was literally how do you extend runway, right? When we first didn't know it was going to happen. And our business is primarily focused in the outdoors, and that obviously saw a ton of demand. On Curated, we help people make high consideration purchases. So think someone's going to buy a mountain bike, a high-end coffee machine, a set of skis. And during the pandemic, people were buying outdoors equipment, and that stuff was historically sold in stores. So our demand went through the roof. And so it was definitely lots of ups and downs, but it was good for us.
Yeah, so that's quite interesting because you also worked with physical retailers during the time. So how did your relationship with them change?
The only way it changed is we just did a lot more business with them. So we're a marketplace. We work with brands directly and retailers. And with the retailers that we had worked with in the past, they were able to help us with all the excess demand we were getting. But it was just more business with them, but nothing changed.
And are there any challenges that are still lingering from the past 2 years that you're dealing with?
Yeah, for sure. So you went from a world where supply chain, right? Like you couldn't get product, right? There was part issues, and so it was difficult to get final products, to now where you have an oversupply, right? And so we've gone from a place where it was hard to get inventory, and our experts would help people figure out like, well, this is a substitute that could work for you, to a place now where brands have way too much inventory, and we're another place for them to be able to move their goods. And so we're using this as an opportunity to pick up a lot of brands.
Yeah, so what do brands do about oversupply?
It's tough, right? Because if you're a high-end brand, and we work with, so the stuff that we sell on Curated is not typically direct to factory or anything like that. It's well-known, established brands. And so one of the last things they want to do is start discounting stuff because it erodes their brand. And with Curated, we're able to then create an additional channel for them to be able to sell without them having to be discounters. But it is a tough time for brands right now because sales move inventory, but it also has long-term negative impacts.
And to kind of loop Kirsten in, who is one of your investors, how did conversations between you two change during the pandemic, and how do they compare to now during the economic downturn?
Problem on problem? You want to go first, or you want me to go first?
I'll let you go first.
One of the things I love most about being an early stage investor is the opportunity to form a relationship with a founder before they've built out a whole team, and to really, be part of that process and hopefully be one of the first, second, or third phone calls to talk something through. And at every step of a startup journey, you're dealing with decisions that have multiple impacts ongoing, and I think that you hope to have to take those things seriously at every point in time, because in general you're dealing with limited resources to try to have like big outcomes or big impact. And I think Eddie and I have always had really candid, open conversations, and conversations that have been rooted in a shared ambition for what the business can become, but a healthy debate around how do we balance kind of these limited resources to try to achieve the biggest outcomes or the most proof points against the business. And so I think it's less about how the conversation changed. It just became a bit more intense because there were more moving parts and more uncertainty to try to navigate during that time period.
Yeah, what I would say to that is like, we went from talking weekly to every few days and sharing data points and probably going a little bit deeper into like financials of the business. But I think that in general, like your investors should always have a very clear understanding of your company and what's going on, the good and the bads. So it wasn't a matter of like the tone of the conversation changing. The questions did some, but I always think of a good investor as like an additional co-founder, and so they have to know everything.
Yeah, and to talk a little bit more about the investor-founder relationship between you two, where did you both meet?
Actually, we had a common friend who introduced us, somebody who had, for 2 years leading up to the introduction, spoken highly of Eddie, teased me about this idea that he was working on that he believed that I would be really excited about. So the anticipation was really high in advance of having a chance to sit down with Eddie and talk about Curated and talk about what his vision for the future was. And we had a meeting in my office that I think, like any first pitch meeting, was probably scheduled for half an hour. But I think there was a lot of energy and enthusiasm on my part for both what Eddie brought to the table and his background and how he was leveraging that for this business and what the ambition was for the future, that half an hour conversation turned into like 2 or 3 hours.
Yeah, and I guess, Eddie, what made you really want to take a check from Kirsten and Forerunner?
Cover yours for a second. So, I mean, there's 2 parts of this. One is, I'm a really big believer that whoever you're going to go into business with, whether it's a co-founder or it's an investor, you're going to be in a like 5-10 year relationship with that person. And so you really have to figure out, like, do you two work together? Like, do you want to be working with this person for the next 10 years? And the second thing is like, can this person add value for the next 10 years, right? Because the company's going to go through different stages and need different advice at different points, whether it's at the bottom of the pandemic or the growth stage of the pandemic or what we're dealing with today. And so we went through a list of kind of really curating, for lack of a better term, who we wanted to work with, and like Kirsten obviously was at the top of that list. And so, and at the time, like, it was a bet, and I told our investors, or not my investors, sorry, my co-founders, I actually don't want to meet with anybody else. I'd met the person that, like, I think I want to be in business with, which was a big debate, but I think it ended up being the right decision.
Yeah, and just looping e-commerce back into this, the market has been slowing down a little bit, and I'm assuming that one reason you really invested into Eddie as a founder and the product was because you really liked it and believed in it. Kirsten, are you still quite bullish on the sector?
Well, I'm definitely bullish on Curated, for sure. I think that I think we are investing into change and new models that are reshaping industries. So I think there's a lot of room for improvement across the retail and commerce landscape. We've witnessed that over the last decade as we've been investing through Forerunner. I think that change continues to evolve, so there's, as there's new, unique opportunities today. So in general, like, yes, I think that the types of things we're investing in or where we think the biggest changes are happening, of course, those evolve over time.
How have they evolved now?
Forerunner's been in business for 10 years, and we've invested in, companies across the spectrum of business to consumer and B2B companies. But we have had, a lot of common themes across the commerce landscape since the earliest days of Forerunner. And 10 years ago when we launched the firm, one of the theses that was kind of front and center was the buyer there's a new revolution in commerce that's being driven by the buyer. And it was really about a new purchase journey being enabled through social media and through digital access. And this idea that consumers had this new path to discovery, they had a new way of vetting products, and they had a new expectation for how they should buy them. And that really upended the traditional wholesale retail model. Suddenly wholesale businesses became retailers. That made retailers have to think more, specifically about what their value proposition was. And from there, a bunch of different businesses emerged and different business models and different ways of meeting consumer demand. As we move through the cycle, parts of that continue to get refined, consumer behavior changes again. One of the biggest things that we've seen is that digital access has continued to become more dynamic. And we're now in a stage where there's an opportunity for a one-on-one connection. And we call this like the revolution being driven by the seller, and that the face of the seller is no longer just a big brand or just a retailer, but it's a person selling something on TikTok. And so if that's the case, what does that mean for the business tools and processes that enable that? And so a lot of the investing over the last couple of years has been focused on that part of the market too. And then of course there's something like Eddie's business, which is taking principles that existed in offline retail and thinking about how people's behaviors and how people's preferences have changed and reimagining them for a world where there's digital access and comfort, kind of shopping from your home. But I think really it's a it's about bringing it to life in a much more dynamic way. Amazon 20 years ago or 30 years ago now invented kind of what is still like the common shopping experience in general, which is a navigation and a category drop-down menu, and you go to a product page and see a written review. And I think the consumer is ready. I know the consumer is ready for a more dynamic experience. It's about how do you bring those to life and make them into scalable, attractive businesses. And Curated is one vision for that. It takes the principle of having a shop, a person in a shop that works there, that knows the product, that has, in the case of outdoor goods, for example, a product enthusiast, somebody who's, maybe does it as a hobby on their weekend, who can really speak passionately and connectedly about what the product is, and being able to bring that into the shopping experience. And now we can do that in the digital realm, where there's a tremendous amount of more access to that input.
Yes, and kind of a similar question to you, Eddie, in terms of what does the economic slowdown right now mean for Curated, and what consumer needs are you anticipating or adapting towards right now?
So I'd say the two things there. One, when you're a small player that's growing quickly, but you're a small percentage of a market, you can continue to grow even when there's a slowdown. And so even though we operate in categories that may be slowing down, specifically our business is still growing. And then the second is probably the thing that we see the most today is consumers are spending longer talking to experts, right? Like, so the average purchase on Curated is over $750. 90% of our purchases come via the assistance of an expert. And so the expert's going back and forth over text or over email with the consumer. And so we are seeing people take longer, but they're still making the purchases. I think that what a slowdown means is, like, if you're going to spend the money, you want to make sure you're going to get the right thing. But for us, that's always been at the core of our business. People don't make haphazard decisions when they're spending, when they're making such a big purchase.
And in terms of you fundraising, are you planning on fundraising this right now or anytime soon? And are you hoping to have Forerunner?
This is actually I'm about to ask Kirsten for some money right now.
Great place to do it on stage.
Yeah, exactly. So the way that I've always believed that you should build a business is, one, to always anticipate the worst. Like, be very, very focused on building a truly healthy business and very focused on unit economics. And so we're in a position right now where, like, we'll raise when the time is right, but there's no need to right now. Like, I've got an incredible team. We're very focused. Obviously the markets are what they are today, and so it probably would not be the most opportune time to go fundraise, but we also don't have any need to.
And to go back to talking a little bit more about your relationship, so you spoke a little bit about how weekly calls turned into every few days. What else goes into sustaining a founder and investor relationship?
I think it's having a relationship where both of you can be really intense and direct with one another, and the other one doesn't take it the wrong way. Kirsten calls me on my bullshit when she disagrees with me on something. And I feel very comfortable pushing back on her and not being worried that, like, if we're in a disagreement, that it's going to impact, for example, future fundraisers.
What do you guys disagree on?
All kinds of stuff.
All kinds of things. I mean, it's in the spirit of healthy debate. I think that when you're making a decision, it's important to look at kind of all sides of it and sort of, kind of have a rigorous conversation about what the pros and the cons are. Every founder-investor relationship is unique. I have the privilege of being on 10 or so boards and having close relationships, I think, with all of those founders. They all take a little bit of a different form factor or have a different cadence to them. I try to think about, I try to respect the fact that founders are busy, they've got a lot of pressure, they've got a lot of people and a lot of demands on them. It's my job to figure out how I can be the strongest supporting cast member for them. I think Eddie and I share what in many ways is my version of an ideal relationship, where we have a lot of easy, quick conversations. And I don't mean easy like they're not rigorous or whatever, but just like, hey, did you think about this? Or I read this the other day, we should be thinking about that. Or where did you go for that? I mean, we're just kind of more in the flow and keeping it current and keeping it very topical oriented.
Yeah, I mean, what I was trying to say was, for example, we don't have scheduled one-on-ones, right? It's just a text, it's a quick phone call, it's an email, hey, are you thinking about this? I think it's better to over-communicate, because when people don't know, they assume the worst. And that's true of, like, your teams, that's true of your investors, and so there's no surprises.
I would prefer to always know as much information as a founder is willing to share, or more than they're willing to share. But you don't want to feel like you are creating a burden on a founder who is otherwise busy by constantly asking for information. So it is really great when you feel like you have a very open dialogue, and that sort of keeps you connected kind of on the deepest levels, as opposed to every couple months having a check-in, because that's not really being close to the business.
And I think very specifically what Kirsten does is, again, calls us out on our blind spots. So like as a company, we're incredibly strong on the technical side, but there are other parts of our business where it's not as natural to the co-founders. And so we either don't know it as well, or we don't invest into it as much. And so she's constantly reminding us to focus in those areas.
And Eddie, you spoke a lot about picking the right investor. So what are some, I guess, green and red flags that founders should look for when searching for an investor?
I mean, by far what I tell everybody is like, don't get overly focused on valuation, right? Like at the end of the day, like it's more of an ego thing. I'm not saying that you should accept terms that are not fair, but over 1 or 2 points of dilution, right? People will go and run an auction process. And I don't believe that a relationship is started on the basis of an auction. I feel like you should figure out who's the person I want to work with for the next 5 or 10 years. Are they really smart, and do I believe they can add value? And that's who you should work with. I think it's one of the challenges you have is, as you go into later stages, you have more and more people, whether it's your team or investors, who also want to see step ups in valuation. And so it's always playing this balance of, again, like you want to make sure you get a fair price. But I think people get way overly fixated on valuation. Right? Like I want to become a unicorn. I want, sometimes raising too much money, right? And too much money can be a bad thing in its own way. But I think and by the way, like this doesn't apply to everybody, right? Like there's certain businesses that are really hard to fund, and unfortunately you have to take the money you can get. But I think that it's much more important to find the right person, if at all possible, over some of the other things that like the next day you don't even care about.
And I'm so interested. So what is one piece of advice that Kirsten gave you that has never left your mind?
I'm interested in that answer too, Eddie.
Probably,
not to put you on the spot or anything.
So, I mean, for starters, we changed the trajectory of our category structure and our focus, right? So initially, the premise behind Curated is we connect consumers to experts who can help give them advice. And in the long term, we want to be in all categories, right? We want to be able to help you do anything from, not only are we selling you a set of skis, we want to help you plan your ski trip, but you could even imagine crazy things like you want to buy an antique car, and there's an expert who can give you advice on that. About 2 years ago, we were in a disparate of categories. We were helping people buy engagement rings, right? We were helping people plan travel. And Kirsten was like, you guys need to focus. And focus both because it creates for a better business, and it's easier story to tell as it pertains to onboarding brands, as it pertains to communicating to consumers. And so we made that change. And this is one where, to the point of a really healthy relationship, I didn't listen the first time. It probably took 5 times, but at the end, I came to terms with the fact that like, that was something that we probably needed to do. And even though I didn't fully appreciate and understand it at the time, it was absolutely the right decision.
And Kirsten, kind of going back to the initial question I asked Eddie, what are some red and green flags that you look for when doing due diligence on a founder right now?
I think, there are 2 main tracks when you're evaluating an early stage opportunity. One is a set of criteria that relates to the market, the audience that they're targeting, the product that they have, and what it will take to bring it to market and reach the milestones. And the other is really the team. There's a lot of things in that front category to think through, or that first category to think through, and I sort of put them in 2 buckets and call the founders out separately, because at early stage companies, and really at any stage of a company, but certainly at the early stage company, founders like highly critical, and it's where we spend a lot of time trying to get to know people, trying to understand like what's their vision for the future, why did they decide to throw themselves into this particular project. How do they think about building a team? How do they think about a go-to-market strategy? And things that you can imagine people talking about. I think the other, the one specific thing that I always try to keep in mind is like, what does this founding team have that will make them stand out in the competitive market that they're competing in? You like to think that you're the only company trying something, but very rarely when there's a big open market, there's a big need, there's a big potential, is there only one company trying to break through and kind of own the conversation or own the opportunity. And so it's, really, I think, a worthwhile question to step back and say, why is this team have an unfair advantage in addressing this opportunity? So for example, in the case of Curated, I think there were versions of similar business models that also caught on to or founders that also caught on to the idea of like, hey, I used to go to my corner store, I'd find a really, well-informed sales associate that would help me pick out my running shoes. That was a great experience. That store's not around anymore. Now I'm kind of having to struggle with going on Amazon and a sea of product that looks the same. I miss that one-on-one experience. Wouldn't it be great if we could have that online? Or similarly, you've heard of, a brand or a store that is missing having the right kinds of salesperson in their store and wants to think about how do they, do something online where they can kind of extend the reach out of their four walls and add that component to the business. But in both of those cases, for example, what might be missing is a real appreciation for the complexity of what it takes to bring that to life, for the technology that has to exist to make it something that is efficient and scalable. Marketplace businesses, are some of the best examples of technology being leveraged to even make a business possible. And I think it's essential because it is a business where you're bringing two sides of the marketplace together. There's a take rate that is your core business model, but then there are all the things that you need to create efficiencies around and operate with precision in order to be able to make it a profitable business. And being able to have smart technology in the case of Curated that matches experts to sellers, that gives experts enough information to enable them to show up efficiently in conversations and give great feedback, the tools to do that, the prompts to communicate, all of that stuff is like an intense, sophisticated tech project. And Eddie and his team are, product people and engineering people first and foremost, who I think were really turned on by the opportunity in retail, but like their learning journey, respectfully in a lot of ways, was to understand more about the retail market. You guys had real understanding of the technology and what you'd need to build.
Yeah, it's not an understatement that Kirsten taught us a lot of what we know about retail. Like at our core, we're really smart at building technology, where we understand marketplace dynamics very well, but the whole world of what brands think about, what consumers think about, how do you need to communicate with them, a lot of that came from Kirsten. I mean, it could be simple things like email may seem outdated, but it still works really well because every team wants to try something new and different, but there's some basics you have to put in place. And I think that the key for our business is, our business has been attempted 5 or 6 times in the past, and it didn't work out. And the reason it didn't was you have to get really good tech put in place to get the efficiencies required. Because otherwise, in our case, we're like, if you think of the whole world's moving towards automation, right? Like, we're trying to replace people. And we're going the opposite direction, where we're putting people into the process. And the only way that you can afford to do so is by automating a lot of other parts. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to pay those people well or at all. And I'm not a believer that people ever want to buy a $2,000 mountain bike with a chatbot. They're always going to want to be able to, if they're going to buy it, they're either going to do it in a store or they'll do it online, both in the context of being able to talk to somebody who's going to be able to help them get the right thing. We're just trying to bring the offline online. But there's a ton of technology that has to get built to do that, right? And so for us, that's been our advantage. And then again, Kirsten helping us with all things retail. And tech, just like marketplace dynamics, but that was really where we needed help most.
And I just want to do a little shout out to the audience that we will be taking Q&A after, so if you want to scan the QR code and submit any questions that you have, we will be answering them in a few moments. But next question, I'm intrigued. I just want your opinions on these in terms of the different shopping habits of different generations and what you've picked up, shopping trends, noticing online, how different consumers shop. What have you been seeing?
Well, different generational trends. I think that one of the most interesting dynamics for us is that we have our experts communicate
via chat, via text, via email, or via calling, and also via video. And it's very interesting, older generations
calling works very well with. But then with younger dynamics, oddly enough, like video works well, but they won't pick up a phone call, which I don't fully understand. Texting works really well with almost everybody. But I think for us, our business is less on like the, because we sell more considered purchases, people spend days, weeks, sometimes months chatting back and forth with our experts. Like it's not like a quick 5-minute conversation and I buy something. It's nowhere close to that. And so a real relationship's built. And so the patterns that we see are probably very different than e-commerce more broadly. Kirsten would probably have more opinions on that.
I honestly think it's like less about generations at this point. I think everybody's pretty, most people are pretty far up the curve on shopping. 50-some% of the commerce done in this country happens on Amazon. That's all digital. So there's a lot of familiarity and trust with that system. One of the evolutions that's really, come online, I think in a big way in the last 5 years, is people being item driven. So they're like, in the context of doing X, Y, and Z, they discover something else and they impulse shop online. And I think that has actually like continued to breed more of a culture of shopping, which has resulted in a lot of shipping products back and forth. And that's also another demonstration of like people's comfort with it, of just like, I'll try it, I'll get it home, I'll ship it back. I think actually we might be past peak on that. And we might be getting to a place where people are like, okay, enough. Like, I don't want as many boxes flying back and forth. I need to be more thoughtful about it. And I think that's the trend that like we're thinking more about what that might mean for the future.
Yeah, because what is the environmental impact of that?
It's terrible, really.
Yeah.
So it's, different things rule the day at different times. I think come on, we're going back 20 years now, but when you could first shop online and get anything you wanted, that was magical. And it opened up access. I think it made people much, kind of more liberal with their shopping decisions as they started to become more inundated with messages and product discovery was happening in more ways more often. And we've kind of, spent the last 20 years becoming more and more and more addicted to shopping. And I think the last 2 years, we've done a lot of consumer surveying over the last, year in particular to kind of think about like, what have people experienced in the last 2 years that might stick going forward or reshape trends going forward? And it's interesting because we all read the data, everybody shopped a lot while they were at home. They diverted dollars from travel or entertainment to buying things for their house or for themselves to try to feel better. And I think at the end of all of that, it's like having a big giant meal and feel like you overate. It's like, oh my gosh, I bought too much stuff. I saw one too many packages on my doorstep. While there's also this, rising tide of headlines around climate change, around pollution, around the lack of sustainability in the supply chain. And so I think that's on a collision path for people to check and say, what really should underpin our shopping habits going forward. But we haven't seen that in the numbers or the data yet.
What's interesting for us is we're the opposite of impulse shopping.
Yeah.
Right, like people don't buy 3 bikes, send 2 back, right? Like
I really appreciate that about Curated, right? I think it's part of the experience. If you think about it, there's non-discretionary spending and there's discretionary spending. Non-discretionary spending is what you have to spend to keep your life going. The discretionary spending is discretionary. It's fun. And there's been, it's not just about getting and securing the item. It's about the journey. It's about the research you do. It's about the discovery. It's about the chatting with friends about it. And that's some of what's been lost online. Like there's been new elements of it, TikToks and Instagram and whatnot, but like the dynamic kind of back and forth hasn't been the same. And I think Curated really brings that into the possibilities on digital, where people, you have great stories of people, experts and shoppers becoming friendly, maybe even meeting to golf with their new clubs that they bought or ski with their, and so there's a sense of kind of community and connection, ironically, that can be found in shopping. And I think, well, maybe it's not ironic, because if you think about it, like that's what the mall was. The mall was like a social experiment or social endeavor more than anything. It's where people went to kind of go have lunch and meet friends and, kind of see what was new. I think it's just happening in different ways now because we connect differently in digital realm.
Yeah, and to kind of hone on something that you said previously, Eddie, in terms of how a lot of things are moving towards AI and automation within retail, and you're doing the exact opposite. I just wanted to know a little bit more as to why.
Because I don't think that people want to buy a $2,000 mountain bike with a chatbot. I think that as a company, we really get excited about the idea of helping experts monetize their passion. Like, that's pretty awesome, right? Like, if you're really into golfing or skiing or whatever, you get paid and can make a really good living giving people advice on those things and talking about the things that get you really motivated. It's also because that's what the consumer wants, right? So the consumer doesn't want to have the anxiety of, like, I read some reviews, I haven't bought a set of skis in 7 years, and just based on those reviews, I'm making a decision. Like, that's the interesting thing about our business is that the categories that we operate in are 80 to 85, sometimes 90% still done in stores today. So people do tons of research online, but they still buy it in stores. And the reason they do so is because they want to make sure that they're not getting the wrong thing. And we believe the expert helps solve that.
Yes, and now looking at some of the audience questions to ask you. Someone asked, beyond commerce, your investment thesis has evolved into looking for essential consumer experiences that are still not consumer-centric. Are there any specific pain points?
That's right, totally. Can you say it again? Sorry.
Oh, maybe. It says, beyond commerce, your investment, or maybe they're asking, like, has your investment thesis evolved into looking for essential consumer experiences that are not consumer-centric? Are there any specific pain points?
That are not consumer-centric?
That are still not. Maybe I will ask another one.
Okay, well, I'll attempt at that. You know, I think that there's been the consumerization of a lot of categories over time. Healthcare is one of the ones that pop to mind. I think it's a topic that people, as they've had more access to information, have started to feel, well, first of all, you've either had a disappointment with your own healthcare service. Everybody, you know, whether it's you or your family, has some story about they couldn't get the medical attention they need, or they couldn't get access to the doctor they needed, they couldn't get access to the product. So I think there's a lot more of a kind of, I got to take it into my own hands type approach. There's also a lot more information, so people have a lot, they're more in tune with their bodies, with their health, and they're taking a proactive stance towards it, and that's bringing up a whole nother category of needs and products and services that people are in the market for that have become consumer offerings that maybe didn't even exist that way before.
And Eddie, someone wants to know what differentiates your product from Wirecutter.
Well, with Wirecutter, you can't talk to people.
And it's one person's edit or a small group of people's edit, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So experts on Curated basically get connected with the consumer and basically give you advice on whatever they believe is best for you. We don't believe that a best set of skis exists, or a best snowboard, or a best car, or a best anything. We believe that there is something that's the right thing for you based on your needs. And we think that to make that really come to life and to make that happen, you need to actually have the context of what somebody's going through and what they're prioritizing.
So imagine if you had a personalized Wirecutter,
yeah.
Right? That, like, a system that knew more about you over time and could put together, you know, an entire list of different recommendations for different aspects of your life that were contributed from people that were experts in each of those categories. That's what Curated enables.
And this is an interesting question for you both. Within retail and e-commerce, how do you choose what to automate? And what are some examples of automation wins while keeping the experts central to the experience?
Oh, there's a ton.
Yeah.
So for starters, probably one of the most interesting ones would be our experts hire other experts. So we built a bunch of technology where a panel of experts that we trust review your application. And there's a video application, there's a technical assessment, there's a personality assessment, there's a bunch of different things, but nobody from HQ touches that. It's all done within software and within the community. And so that's an example where not only did it save us a bunch of money, but it also improved the quality of hiring because our experts have a better understanding of who's a really good ski expert or coffee expert than one of our own people at HQ.
There's also the really important aspect of matching, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many examples. There's the way that we schedule experts, right? Like, how do you decide which experts to have online at what time? To Kirsten's point, matching, right? So if you're looking for a pair of boots who is the right expert to give you advice on those boots? Because if I have 100 experts available, some are super knowledgeable boot fitters, and some are a little bit less. And so we try to use technology everywhere we can, other than to ever think about replacing the experts.
Yes, and did you have anything you want to add to that? Okay, I will try to fit in one more audience question. Someone said, there is a trend with Forerunner investing in brands who have credible community at the core, like Curated. What's the next iteration of that for you?
What's the next iteration of community in a shopping experience, or the next I actually think that one of the big needs people have right now is feeling connected and feeling part of community. We've all, for the last 2 decades have grown up with social media. They're largely in big ubiquitous communities. I think there's this real desire to connect over more specific things. I think Curated is an example of that. There's a group of customers, a group of experts that are really coming together around skiing. It started with a purchase journey, but now there's something else kind of happening there among that group. I think when we think about kind of, again, in that non-discretionary item, it is not just about a product or a service. It's about the whole experience that you're having. And that might be leading up to shopping, that might be afterward shopping. So I think, the community idea and the connection idea is one that's relevant in commerce, but more importantly, I think it's relevant everywhere. I think that's something people are really looking for and need. And so, however we think about what the future, I don't make up the future. Founders come in and tell me what that is. But right now we're looking at what are the need states and how are people's behaviors changing, or might they change? And then somebody else, kind of inspires us with their idea and their approach to it. But if I put what I think people need at the forefront, I do think people are looking for community. I do think people are looking for, in general, they're looking for more purpose in their life. So they want to maybe get out and have activities or have hobbies or connect with people at that. If the part of the business model is shopping in the middle, okay, that's an interesting approach.
And just because I'm interested, what is the next iteration of community for you, Eddie?
Sorry, can you repeat
The
that?
next iteration of community for you.
So for us, it's a couple of things. One is, it's not just, today it happens in a bit of a happenstance fashion where our experts and customers will go golfing together, they'll go skiing together, but we actually, in our product, want to make that actually come very much to life, where there are communities that are built, there's content that's being shared. And it's also about how we help experts build their own communities amongst themselves. So for example, we have these incredibly busy Slack channels where not only we'll have our ski experts, but we'll have our ski experts in Colorado, right? And 30 of them will get together and go riding together, and then how we can then incorporate the 5,000 users that we have in Colorado, right, to go skiing with them. There's some really cool stuff that that worth starting to think about there.
And very quickly, overall, what is next for both of you?
I'm gonna let you go first.
I think right now it is really, the big question that we're asking ourselves around our table is, what does all this change add up to? We've had 2 years of unprecedented upheaval in our lives. Now we have economic uncertainty. What really is important going forward, and how much of what people are feeling now is reactionary versus things that stick for the future. I think there's a lot of new needs that have been discovered through this time period and all this change, and need speaks to opportunity. So, I think from an investment standpoint, I feel like that keeps us on high alert for what are the solutions to address those needs.
Eddie,
For me,
14 seconds,
this is going to sound like a lame answer, but not that much is going to be changing for us. We've been super focused, and we're going to continue to be focused. Sure, things are changing, and so we'll optimize amongst the edges, but we are really focused on just executing on what's ahead of us.
And that is all we have time for today. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.